Welcome back to another episode of Bangerangs and Daggers. I'm your host out here in Washington, D.C., Kevin Knight, and we have a special episode for you this week. Joining us, we have Eric Lucian, from formerly a Nebraska football player. I know normally we're a Nebraska Ball exclusive podcast, but we are crossing over to do some cross-sports coverage here, like we're the Five Heart podcast or something. Not that anybody should listen to that podcast. Kidding. Anyway, Eric comes out of Pierce, Nebraska, and played at Nebraska from 2003 to 2005 as a kicker, and now lives in Chicago after getting his PhD in bioengineering from the University of Chicago. For those who may not be familiar, the original member of the Big Ten, in fact, and is a co-founder of LGBT Sports Safe Inclusion Program. And he happens to do other work, including consulting work now. How are you doing in Chicago, Eric?
Good. I'm just living that quarantine life during this pandemic, but hanging in there.
Certainly. It's, I imagine, slightly different weather than out here in D.C., but at least it's nearly spring, right?
Yeah, I mean, if that's anything positive to focus on, yeah, I'll take it.
Yeah, almost summer, I guess. It's how is it almost June? I don't. Then again, what is time anymore, really? But
exactly.
Yeah. So let's get into it. You happen to obviously be from Nebraska, so I'm sure that probably explains a little bit the interest in football. But talk to us a little bit. How did you get into kicking with football?
Well, I mean, growing up in Pierce, Nebraska, a small farm community, you, as any sort of athlete, you basically are going to be forced to play all sports. You're going to be highly encouraged, I should say, to play all sports because they need you. They just need bodies in some way. But football in Pierce was, we were always a powerhouse in the state. We were usually ranked in the top three in our division. So football was kind of an easy thing for me to get into. I was always interested in it. Ironically, kicking was not my first love in football. My first love in football was defensive tackle in 7th and 8th grade, because at that time I was the largest person in my class and I was quick and fast. I'd shoot the gap and sack the quarterback a ton. So that was my favorite position, was actually defensive tackle. But I played a lot of soccer growing up, hence the kicking, and never really knew why when I'd play when we played other teams, why their kickers couldn't kick the ball as far or as high or as accurate as I could. I don't know. I guess it was a natural gift. In soccer, I was always known as having the leg. You know, I'd go across midfield, and if the keeper was out, I'd shoot it over his head into the goal. So I just always had a lot of power and realized I was good at it and just kind of got into it.
All right, so let's see, soccer and football. Were there any other sports as well that you played?
Oh, yes. I mean, considering this is a basketball podcast, I did play basketball for a number of years, up until my junior year of high school, actually. And the reason why that ended was the coach at the time wasn't happy that I had to miss a Saturday shoot-around practice because I was going to play on the Nebraska Olympic Development Program soccer team that weekend in Omaha, which was a state select team that they then select the junior Olympic team and stuff. So I thought missing a shoot around practice was okay, but apparently it wasn't. And he was upset. He wouldn't play me. And I was just like, I don't need the drama. So I hung up my basketball gear and actually turned into drama at that time and decided I'm going to do the school play because why not do another thing, which was fun. But I did basketball. I did baseball for a number of years, although it wasn't a high school sanctioned sport. It was just kind of our small town's team, as well as a year of wrestling. I did cross country and I did a track and field all through junior high and high school, and even considered doing that in college. But I decided there's no way I could do football and track at the University of Nebraska while studying chemical engineering at that time. Just a little bit overwhelming. So I just stuck with football.
Okay, so I was the running nerd at my high school, actually. So what track events did you do?
So ironically, so I started in long distance, hence cross country, but I had a bad back from like sixth grade, and it just got progressively worse to the point of I had to wear a back brace for a little over a year in junior high, and that kind of pushed me out of long distance. And I was always very fast with sprints, so I kind of switched to sprints. So I did like the 100, 200, 4x1, but I was really good at jumping. I've always had some jumpers on me, so I focused on a little bit on triple jump, long jump, but mainly high jump. And as high school progressed, I started to push away from the running and just focus on jumping to the point of I only did high jump my last 2 years of high school, and that's what I was considering doing in college.
Okay. I did briefly try. I think this is the first time I'll have disclosed this on SB Nation, but I actually was a walk-on and undergrad myself for about a week and a half.
Nice.
But between the time commitment for that and I had a rib problem, and long distance running was not particularly great when
Oh no.
it's a piercing stab when you try and breathe after a while. So I was like, yeah, no, I'm done. But yeah, so fun connection there. Yeah, so that brings us to kind of the meat of what we're looking to talk about here. Is you happen to have a unique perspective on your time at Nebraska and when you went there to play football, which is you were the first out football player at Nebraska. So can you kind of get into telling us about that? I guess let's start with the recruiting process for that, because
Okay,
you came out in
so
high school, right?
yeah, so I'll give you a little background about, I guess, my high school experience before jumping right into Nebraska. So, like, I came out my junior year of high school in small town Pierce, Nebraska, to a very loving mother, but also very homophobic father, at least at the time. We've since become very close, and he's one of my biggest supporters now. So that's amazing because not many people have that story or that experience of the transition. But honestly, in that story, which we can get into later, sports is what I think helped that for him, helped open up his heart and his eyes, was seeing my love and acceptance in the end of my story at Nebraska uh, by being an openly gay athlete and just being my authentic self. So I came out my junior year of high school. Um, Sports was always kind of my solace. It didn't really matter, if you're what any identities you carried. If you could play, you could play. And I was talented at sports. I was a really good athlete. So I just kind of focused on sports as well as academics, of course, because that was very, very important to me. And ultimately, what got me a big scholarship to the University of Nebraska was my academic side. But getting recruited, I mean, like I said, I came out my junior year of high school, so everyone in the town knew. Um, Coaches would come in from Nebraska to watch games, to meet at my house. I know they had to have been hearing about, my sexuality at the time, because it was the talk of Northeast Nebraska. I mean, if you grow up in Nebraska, you know that we have no professional sports. So if you play Nebraska football, you are kind of deemed a celebrity, even if you're just being recruited. So people already knew a lot of my business before I was even on the team or even signed. So that junior year, I know coaches knew, but as friends and other people I've talked to have said that they always say that, well, the coaches must have known that you were too good to pass up, regardless of your sexuality. And I'm like, okay. I mean, again, this is 2003. This is before marriage equality. This is a few years after Matthew Shepard was brutally murdered in the neighboring state of Wyoming. Literal federal protections for LGBTQ. So it's like a completely different time than fast forward 17 years to where we are today, which we still have a long ways to go. But so I kind of went into Nebraska my freshman year just thinking like, well, I'm already out. I'm not ashamed of who I am. I don't think my sexuality should be anything to be judged, to judge me on. People should judge me on my character and my values. And so I was like, if someone asks me if I'm gay, I'm going to be honest and I'm going to, say yes. But the first several months, no one really asked me. But there was the stipulation or the speculations and stuff. And there was a lot of homophobic stuff that I endured from teammates. I had a handful of homophobic teammates that, you know, made it known that it doesn't matter how good I am. Like, we're gonna make fun of you. We're going to, haze you. We're going to physically threaten you, and a few times physically assault me, which made it very difficult because I'm just trying to be there, be the best athlete I can be, but at the same time dealing with homophobia from some teammates as well as a few coaches. But I just said, I'm just going to be myself. I'm going to work hard, and through that, I'm going to prove to them that I am like everyone else. I am an athlete first and foremost, and my identity of my sexuality, yeah, I'm proud of that, but that isn't just who I am, and it's not something to judge me by. And through that experience and kind of approaching it that way and being unapologetically me, I think that's why, as we get into my story a little bit deeper, why it transitioned from all that an immense struggle at the beginning to ultimately love and acceptance is because I was just myself and I was always vulnerable. And through my me being vulnerable, other people were allowed to see that and open up their hearts and minds and realize that, oh, you're just another person, and love and accept me for who I am.
Yeah, and thank you for kind of that intro. I know there's a really interesting story, and we'll have it in the posting on the website, obviously, for anybody who's interested in taking a look at your talk with fellow SB Nation site Outsports. But there's one player in particular I know that stood out in your struggles with being kind of the out player, and two guys in particular that really helped you with kind of being accepted by the team. Can you talk a little bit about those three guys?
Yeah. So during my recruiting process, I made friends with two athletes, two Husker football or soon to be Husker football players like myself, who ironically were from Naperville, so a suburb of Chicago, which is where I'm at now. So kind of full circle there. They just befriended me on recruiting trips, and I don't know if it's because they were from a much larger city or area that they were more open-minded already in 2003, but they loved and accepted me for who I was no matter what from the beginning. And so those two people, Corey McEwen and Sean Hill, were very loved and accepted widely by the team. They were pretty much the jokers of the team, so everyone loved to like sit around and laugh with them. And I think because they accepted me so much, that helped my teammates open up and accept me a little bit quicker. And so we kind of, one day we were sitting at lunch, and it was probably 3 months into my career there. Corey and Sean just kind of looked at me and said, "Hey, pretty boy." And Pretty Boy was my nickname that they gave me, and it stuck throughout college. And people outside of the athletics department called me. It was interesting to say the least. But so they're like, "Hey, Pretty Boy, we have a question." And I immediately knew what that question was. And I'm like, "Well, here we go." And Corey's just like, "Are you gay?" And I go, "Yeah, is that a problem?" He's like, "Nope, we thought so. We just wanted to check." And I was like, "Well, that was the easiest coming out experience of my life. I wish that's how they all were." But so from there, we just went about our day and went to practice. But because of their big personalities and their mouths, that news spread very quickly, and soon the entire department and state and Midwest, and I mean, Facebook had just come out around that time, and I always had on there "interested in men," and that kind of opened up people from all over the country to reach out, and some hate, but much more love and acceptance from just being my true self. But then the third guy you were mentioning, which I refer to as John always when I speak, because I want to keep him anonymous, just because I don't want any backlash on him. He was kind of the leader of the homophobic group, and always like threatened me physically, said a lot of homophobic slurs, and made it really, really difficult to, go to practice every day, not knowing if this huge beast of a human, because I was I was a kicker. Yeah, I was 195 pounds and 6'3" and muscular. He was 280 probably, tall, big, huge person. So having someone like that threaten your life and your physical safety every day was very hard. And I even had a physical altercation with him at one point, which if they, read my firsthand account of all this, which I wrote throughout sports, granted, I did not title it. So that's the one thing I don't really care for it. In that piece is the title because it sounds like a children's fable, but it's a good story to kind of read and show the overall transformation of people who can be extremely homophobic and from very conservative parts of the country, how they can open their hearts and minds to those who are different than them just by having experience in meeting someone who is different than them. And so ultimately, yeah, John became one of my biggest friends and supporters. And that story is it's a really beautiful story from where it kind of started in so much pain and struggle and fear and anger, to ultimately having my back, which transformed my athletic career at Nebraska and kind of opened, I think, some doors to my acceptance on the team, but not just by my teammates, but by more of the coaches. Yeah, there was still one coach in particular who was homophobic throughout my entire process, which I'm sure really hurt my playing time, and stuff. But I mean, at the end of the day, I always look at, what are the positives and negatives, and do the positives outweigh the negatives? And I think it's very clear, especially with the work that I do now with my organization, LGBT Sports Safe and Diversity and Inclusion Consulting, and really trying to change the world of sports to be a safe place for everyone, no matter what identities they carry. It's clear to me that everything I went through, all the positives far outweigh the negatives. Even though I never got my shot, even, and never really saw the field, it doesn't matter because I did something much bigger just by being myself. And I never could have imagined that one person could create that much change at that time. That was kind of my eye-opening moment to know one person can change the world, because I was firsthand kind of experiencing that. And it's kind of been a beautiful and rocky and all over the, I guess the journey's been wild and crazy since then, but I wouldn't trade any of it for the world.
And so does Crown Royal still have any special meaning for you after the birthday party where John kind of opened up about his transformation?
I mean, that's funny you brought up Crown Royal. But I mean, it kind of does. Whenever I see a bottle, it kind of puts a smile on my face because it takes me back to that moment. And I mean, I apologize if I get a little emotional here, but I'm not one to shy away from showing my emotion. I don't think anyone should shy away from that. So yeah, it was a very touching moment. So every time I do see Crown Royal, I get a little misty probably and a little sentimental, but I ironically don't really drink that. I'm into bourbon now.
More than fair, yeah. My one of my sister-in-laws is from Kentucky, so I certainly don't object to bourbon consumption, with her background. But so let's talk a little bit about the coaches as well. So you were there from 2003 to 2005 on the team, that is. So you were there right at the end of the Frank Solich era, and then the start of the Bill Callahan era. So what kind of experience did you have working with the coaches? Obviously, some of them were a little bit iffy, so to speak, on the openly gay part, but overall it was a pretty positive experience for you, right?
Yeah, I mean, especially with head coaches. Head coaches wise, Frank and Bill, they were always very inclusive and always kind of a champion of who I was, I think. Frank, as if you may know from just watching him do interviews and stuff, and his personality, he's a lot. I think he's a little bit quieter than Coach Callahan. so that's kind of how he was with me. He wasn't always as talkative, I guess, but he was always very nice and very supportive. Coach Callahan, he and I had a great relationship. And I, it's interesting because I haven't really talked to him since my time there, and I've always kind of wondered what it would be like, however many years it is now later, 15 years. Wow, it's really aging us here. But 15 years later, to maybe have a conversation with him again and just see what his viewpoint was or what he thought, back then about my experience and maybe some of the things he heard from his end. And it doesn't have to be a public conversation. I would love it to be a private, heartfelt conversation. But no, he was always a very big supporter of me. And I really liked him as a coach, Coach Callahan, because he cared about his athletes and his players. And you saw that every single day, not only on the field or at practice, but you saw that in just one-on-one conversations, to the point where, like, the end of my time there, when like my career ended with a spinal fusion back surgery, because, like, as I mentioned earlier in this podcast, I had always kind of struggled with back problems. And then through my time as an openly gay athlete, I had to prove my self-worth so much more than my fellow teammates, that I was overworking out and I was pushing my body way beyond its limits, to the point of where I had 2 stress fractures in my lower spine, and they got so severe that both pedicles on one of my vertebrae were completely severed, and there was no stability on one of my vertebrae, and so it was hitting my spinal cord. And after the Alamo Bowl in 2005, I was basically in a state of paralysis after one of our conditioning sessions on the turf, and realized I had to get it fixed. And so bringing this back to Coach Callahan is when I went in and shared that news with him of, like, my career's over before it ever really could have even begun, was really hard for me, because I'm sitting there talking through tears. And at that moment I saw him shedding a tear, and that right there meant so much to me, because I knew his heart was really in it, and that he cared for me more than just an athlete, and that it didn't matter really what my sexuality was, that I was human. I was one of his players, and he cared about me more than just as an athlete. And so that was a really beautiful moment, which I cherish to this day. So I would love to have another conversation with him someday about all of that.
Certainly, and certainly, if anybody with the athletic department happens to by chance listen to the podcast and have the contact information, let's see if we can make that happen. But so let's actually let's share. Go back to a different Alamo Bowl. I think you mentioned one that I would prefer not to be named, which we were both actually at, coincidentally. Not that we knew each other then, obviously, but the 2003 Alamo Bowl, I believe. So Bo Pelini was the interim head coach. You guys happened to pretty soundly defeat a certain team. Now, let's just not rub it in by mentioning who it was.
State.
Okay, yeah, I had to go there. So yeah, I mean, you had a pretty great celebration after the game, right? This is pre John fully being on board, though.
Yes,
if I remember the time.
Yeah, this is kind of one of the experiences that I look at as when he started to change for the better. And like you said, we got back to the hotel. Everything was a big celebration, and I was on my way to one of the many parties that all the athletes were going to attend. And as I was walking down the hall in this big hotel, there's John at the other end of the hall with some of his buddies walking towards me, apparently going to the same party. And I was just thinking at the time, like, I don't want to deal with that, this hatred or homophobia right now. And he yells out a homophobic slur. But at that time, one of his friends put his arm on him, like kind of on his shoulder, and just said, "Not today." And he just kind of quieted down and listened and like fell in order. And that to me was kind of the turning point of, like, he's seeing his own friends kind of shutting him up and telling him, hey, he's more than his sexuality. Like, give him a chance, like open your heart up a little bit. And I think that's when he started to. So the 2003 Alamo Bowl is special to me in that regard, because I think it kind of started the transition up from struggle, or immense struggle, I should say, because there was still struggle even towards the end of my career there. But from immense struggle to ultimately much more love and acceptance.
And definitely a better night than I had that night. But we'll take a moment as I get over the pain of that memory myself, and we'll take a break. And when we come back, we'll pause on the football talk to take a look at your experience with Nebraska as the overall athletic department. So back in a moment. And we're back again. Thanks for sticking with us. Nebraska happens to be a school that folks like to say has a fairly close-knit athletic department, not just within football, but among all the different sports. And you've kind of worked with other universities across the country. Is that something that you think kind of holds true, or is that maybe not necessarily as true? I mean, how was it when you were there, interacting with the other sports?
I mean, I would say it's a fairly accurate assumption of what it's like in the Nebraska athletics department. In my experience with athletic departments around the country, I feel it holds true. I don't know. I think what they do outside of just like coaches, I think the administrators and the support staff at Nebraska is just top notch. I mean, you have people like Keith Zimmer and Dennis LeBlanc in there who have been there collectively for years and decades. And to this day, whenever I'm back in Nebraska, I go in and visit with them because they were instrumental also, I think, in being supportive of me. And so I think through people like them and just kind of the way that the complex is set up, the athletes are relatively close there. There's a few sports that I feel kind of are a little bit, more to themselves. But generally, overall, I think the athletes from different sports interact a lot more than what I've seen at other universities, and it's a very nice close-knit group.
Okay. And do you happen to have any fond memories of games at the Bob Devaney Center at the time, since technically this is a basketball podcast? So
at that time, not really, because sadly, most of the games Nebraska lost. But I've had, some good experiences there still. But I really enjoyed, outside of, I guess, Nebraska basketball, I really enjoyed Nebraska volleyball. So I can speak to that from my playing days, because I actually had some roommates of mine in college were Nebraska volleyball players, Michelle Lynch and Melissa Elmer. So I went to a lot of their games. But basketball, sadly, it's just we weren't the most winning team at the time. And though I supported them, every game I saw, they lost. So I don't know if there's a really shining moment in any of that.
Well, maybe your attendance was the bad luck factor there. Who knows?
They have improved since I've been there. So it's a fair assumption.
I mean, they have PDA now, at least. Yeah, they've got PDA at least. I mean, that's definitely an improvement. Remind me of the timeline. It was right after you were done that they started the athletic table program, or was that still going on there? Their sort of communal center for all athlete meals.
Oh no, we already had that when I was there. It was in the Hewitt Center. And I don't know. I really liked that, because I think that's why you were seeing, and interacting with other sports and other athletes a lot more, and having the opportunity to kind of befriend people from, just other areas of sports. Because I've seen in like different universities around the country, a lot of the times the football team, ironically, has their own center where they eat. So a lot of sports can be more segregated in other universities. It's not true in all over the board. But I do think Nebraska is different in that regard.
And so we'll and that reminds me of another part. The athlete prom, right? Did I get the name right?
Yeah, it was like I'm gonna have to really think on the title, but it was like for Valentine's Day. It wasn't necessarily called a prom. I think it was just they called it a student athlete formal. I think was
Okay.
their title, and it was, from my understanding, it was the first one they had ever done. So it was unique in that sense, and then unique in the sense of where I think you're going with this.
Yep, which is you happen to have a date for that, correct?
I sure did. My ex Greg, yeah, um, who ironically then moved to DC for a big stint. So I know you're in DC, so maybe you met him in passing at some point. But so yeah, Greg and I told him, I'm like, we're having a student athlete formal, and everyone's bringing a date, and I would really like you to go. He's like, oh, okay. And I remember telling him, like, this is going to be interesting because, clearly there hasn't been any same-sex dates at any student athlete function that I've ever seen or ever heard of. And I remember sitting there at the table I was with Corey and Sean and a couple of our volleyball friends at this big round table up in one of the skyboxes where the dance was, or formal, whatever you want to call it. And the first slow dance came on, and I looked across the table and I kind of like grabbed Greg's hand and I was like, well, this is one big step for Nebraska athletics. Are you ready? He's like, sure. And we got up and we danced. And I remember some athletes, hooting and hollering, and some people whistling and clapping. But that was a beautiful moment because it showed that, they didn't care, what my sexuality was, and that they were supportive and just wanted me to be happy. So that was a really cool moment in my time at Nebraska. And I wore a crushed velvet, like, I think it was like magenta jacket that I got from Abercrombie and Fitch back when that was popular. And, it was around Valentine's Day, so everyone's wearing red and white. So I'm like, well, let's do it. I think I still have that jacket somewhere hidden in the closet, so I'll have to break that out at some point.
That would definitely be a sight to see. I feel like if you happen to find any pictures in your archives and feel like adding that to the podcast
Oh yeah,
publication.
I'm sure there are some scary ones because at the time I thought it was cool to dye my hair platinum blonde. So not only was I wearing a crushed velvet magenta jacket, I had on like a white undershirt button up, and then like bright white hair. I mean, it was cool at the time. People thought it was great, but looking back, I'm like, what did I do? So, we always all have those choices, and that we may regret or look back on and be like, yeah, I have a different opinion on that hair right now. But
I mean, that was a fad. What, last summer? Was that the thing, or was that it
I don't
was
know.
the fad the summer before, and so everybody was making jokes about it going
I don't
into
even
last
know.
summer?
I don't even know, to be honest. But can tell you now, though, in quarantine, I've had several friends in Chicago do that, and I'm like, is everyone having a Britney Spears moment where they're either shaving their head or they're dyeing it a crazy color? So, I mean, whatever makes people happy and allows them to have some fun while they're in quarantine, I support. As long as it's safe. So,
Yep. Yeah, is what it is, I guess.
exactly.
On that, but um, yeah. So during your time there, obviously, this also was during a big coaching change, and so kind of pausing on that aspect of it and moving on to just kind of a general student athlete perspective. What is that like when you're a football player? You were recruited by one regime, and the coaching staff is like, go. What's that like experiencing it from the athlete and then what's it like adapting to a new head coaching staff coming in?
Oh gosh, I mean, you're hitting the nail on the head with all that, because like I not only experienced like just a coaching change or a coaching regime change, I experienced a lot of that, because even when I was recruited, I was recruited, with Frank Solich, but then Coach Young was the kicking coach and special teams coach. And the year that I was, getting offers and everything, he's being let go or forced to retire. So I think they worded it. And so here's this guy who's recruiting me leaving, but then the new coaches coming in are bringing in their recruits that they've been recruiting, but yet they still want you, like myself, to be there. So that was an interesting time, because different athletes that I had been on recruiting trips with at Nebraska were all worried we're getting offers pulled or what's going to happen. I mean, for anyone who reads more about my story, it shows that I was an invited walk-on, because like I told them, I don't need the scholarship, give it to someone else, since I had academic scholarships and stuff. So I mean, don't waste it on me when we can get another defensive lineman or something. But then also, I think what hurt maybe their chances of or ideas of giving me that scholarship offer was coaches are bringing in their own athletes that they like the new coaching regime was bringing in their own athletes. So that was interesting right there. And then getting started with new coaches under Frank Solich that hadn't been recruiting me, but they had their recruits there as well now, was interesting, because you could see favoritism amongst some of the new coaches with some of the athletes that they brought in, which was kind of hard to deal with, because you're sitting there trying to prove yourself, but someone's already biased because, they've already built this relationship. And then going from there to, like Coach Callahan coming in and bringing an entire new staff pretty much was hard, because not only did we go from the old ways of Nebraska football, I know not only the walk-on, program changing and basically being cut down to almost nothing. I don't want to say eliminated, because it wasn't, but it was cut down drastically to like West Coast offense. That was difficult, because your playbook completely changes, and all of a sudden it becomes more like school than sports, because you're relearning a ton of different things, which is fine, and it's challenging in some ways, so that's a good thing. But it was hard as an athlete. I think all of us across the board, it was hard to kind of find a congruent, I don't know what the right words are for it, but some sort of congruence between the group and the team to kind of fully buy in, because you had some athletes from the Solich era, some athletes now from the Callahan era, and people were recruited for different purposes, and people who were recruited for purposes in Solich are being forced into other positions or into different roles, or being told they have to do something different. And there was just a lot of, I don't know, like tension. That's a good word for that. There was a lot of tension there. And I think that's why, if you look at just kind of the stats, or at least on win losses for the time, why they turned out to be the way they are, or way they were, I should say. Because I will always say this, like with Coach Callahan and the team that we had and the roster, we had the team that could win a national title. With the athletes we had and the abilities we had and what I would see at practice some days, we were unstoppable. But did that translate into how we played on the field? Not very often, because we'd have one person wanting to showboat or do something, and it takes all 11 men on the field doing what they're supposed to do to execute a play correctly, and it just it would fall apart sometimes during games, and it was really disheartening and hard to see when you knew you had a championship team at practice. So I think a lot of that had to do with going through all that coaching transition and all the tension and incongruence amongst the team at that time.
And I guess, so looking more at, because obviously there's 11 guys, there's two different sides of the ball, there's all the different positions and whatnot. What was it like getting to know a different position coach almost just about every season that you were with them? What What are some things that each one might do that you thought was, looking back on it, maybe kind of helpful of um, any given role, maybe, if that question makes sense. I mean, somebody coming into a new position, what was some lessons that maybe you learned from them?
Um, I don't know. I guess a lesson that I learned through all the coaching changes was to try and be more like a chameleon and be more malleable to the different styles of coaching and different, I guess, objectives of what that coach wants you to do. So I just kind of like once like Coach Downing was there and then Coach Bush, like our kickoffs, I remember changed drastically in how we would practice them. Like we were doing a lot more, or at least we were practicing a lot more, these special types of kicks. Like we were not always going for best hang time and distance. We were going for like different types of kicking, like kicking it like a bullet down the center, making it bounce. We were doing different types of onside kicks, different types of punting, and different, like everything was, it just changed a lot. So I guess I learned to be more open to the change in that time. I want to mention like Coach Downing. He was and always a big supporter of mine, and I really valued him as a coach. He was similar to Callahan in the sense of very personable. He was just a nice guy. Yeah, he could be direct with his coaching at times because I think every coach needs to be that way. But in the end, he always had heart and he always cared about his players. So I really enjoyed him as a special teams coach. Um, I'm not going to really speak on some of the other coaching just because of some of my experiences with some of the other coaches, but Coach Downing was great. And I do want to, I always have to say this when I'm on a podcast or doing an interview. I know I was there when Coach Brown was there at some point in my career, and he gets a lot of backlash for a lot of his conservative beliefs or religious beliefs and things he said that are not inclusive and very anti-LGBTQ. Um, I do always say that he never once to my face said anything negative. He never once showed any sort of animosity or ill will towards me. He was always very nice to me, to my face. I don't know what that translated to behind doors when they're having coaches meetings and when they're looking at who's playing and whatnot. I mean, at the end of the day, I didn't get playing time and who knows what all those reasons are. I would often have my teammates' parents or my teammates too come up to me and be like, "When are they going to allow you to kick? Because we see you practice, we see what you're capable of, but why aren't you out there?" And I just always would be like, "I don't know, we'll see." And I just try to stay positive, but it was hard. It was hard constantly wondering, will I ever get the chance to prove myself just because of my sexuality? So I do think, yeah, there was a lot of, I guess, homophobia on some level, kind of hindering that. But I also heard stories that, boosters were talking to the program and saying, we should pull support if you play, or we'll pull support if you play him. And I heard lots of things. I even had a radio station devoted to Nebraska athletics or Husker athletics specifically have an hour-long conversation about, is Nebraska ready for an openly gay football player? Not mentioning my name, but the conversation was not good. And there was a lot of calls coming in that were highly homophobic. So this time period, 17 years ago was so different than now that I'm sure a lot of that factored into what ultimately happened with my career. But, I'm not sitting here sharing any of this to be like oh, why me? Because that's not who I am. And I look at it as all this is a positive because it shaped me into who I am, and it's given me the story and experience and a platform to now help others in a way that I otherwise wouldn't be able to with my work through LGBT Sports Safe and diversity and inclusion work. So all of it was necessary. And, everyone has their own journey to love and acceptance of all sorts of people in all walks of life and all types of identities. So if it took me, in 2003 to 2005 at Nebraska to change the hearts and minds of countless people in the state and around the country and potentially world, then that's what it took. And I'm okay with that. And that's fine. Is it a little hard to see some of your friends or other athletes that you knew at the time that you were at the same caliber of, if not better, going on and pursuing other things athletically? Yeah, it can be at times, but I mean, at the end of the day, like, put down your pride and realize you're doing something much bigger and you're helping the world in my personal opinion, in a better way than what sports can really do. But the beauty in sports is that it unites everyone. It doesn't matter what walk of life you're from or what your identities are. If you're there and you all have that common team that you root for, that brings you together. So sports has a unique ability to unite people, and that's why I love working in sports now, especially in the diversity and inclusion side, because I can really tap into that.
And going along with that theme a little bit, I know obviously back in the 03-05 era with Nebraska, it was a lot different in terms of coverage. I know before you've mentioned reporters generally were obviously aware that you were an out gay player. How rewarding is it nowadays seeing some of the athletes that have come along in more recent years, like obviously at the pro level, Robbie Rogers, Jason Collins, but even at the college level with players like Scott France at Kansas State, and the type of coverage that they get too?
I mean, it's so different than what it was. It's changed in a lot of ways for the better, but there's still so much to go on. I really pray for the day when we're no longer covering it as, oh, the gay athlete, because ultimately I think that's why a lot of these LGBTQ identifying athletes are staying in the closet, is because they don't want that to be their sole identifier to the world, because they are in sports because they love sports, they love to compete. They want to be known as an athlete first and foremost. And yeah, they may be proud of their sexual identity or gender identity, sexual orientation or gender identity, but they don't want that to be in the headlines always. So I think that's what's kind of holding people back. So it has been nice, I think, especially with Scott Franz, seeing his acceptance. I mean, I know now with his story and him trying to go professionally, and he has since announced, I think in the last couple of days, may even been just yesterday, that he is going to hang up his cleats and stuff and kind of shift gears. I know a lot of that is kind of due to where we are with COVID-19, and the NFL is looking to bring on more seasoned players that they've had, and they're not taking as many rookies this year. But I do think had this pandemic not happened, he would definitely be at some of these, these camps and stuff and having a shot. That's not to say that his sexuality isn't being factored in. I don't know, but I'm honestly think on some level it is in some places. But I do think we've come to a place in sport where it is accepted more. I think professional sports has a long way to go, especially college sports is a whole different ballgame. I think a lot of that has to do with not only what sport you're in, but also what part of the country you're in, as well as division-wise, large to small. So there's a lot of work to be done, which is why I'm doing the work I'm doing.
And keeping with the theme of change a little bit, but switching topics a tad, it's been almost 10 years now since Nebraska moved from the Big 12. So let's take a second to talk a little bit about what were some of your favorite memories from your time playing football in the Big 12? Was there a favorite opponent, favorite road trip, anything you kind of missed from those days in particular?
I mean, I always kind of explain being on like a college football team as it's kind of like a frat in some ways. You're a close-knit group of individuals that end up becoming friends and kind of brothers in a sense. And I miss the camaraderie. I miss kind of the laughing together. I mean, I kind of turned into I kind of say the big gay comedian on the team in some ways, because they always would ask me questions, and I always tell them, don't ask me anything you don't want to know because I'm going to give you an honest answer. And they loved it. They loved the brutal honesty. So we'd sit there and we just talk about things. We talk about girls and guys and just life and everything. They'd ask me if I would help them with their chemistry homework. And oftentimes I'm like, I don't have time to do my own homework. So no, I can't. But I miss that kind of brotherhood that we had and the fun times. Honestly, one of my favorite memories was the 2005 Alamo Bowl, which I know you don't really want to talk about.
Mine was the 03.
Okay, well,
Yeah,
05,
05, I believe you guys beat that other school. I'm more than happy about that win. That one's great. I love when that team loses.
You didn't want to discuss, so I was treading lightly on that. But it's good to know 2005 is fair game. But no, 2005 was great. I don't know. For Christmas, I bought myself, with the help of my parents, a gift, and it was like a little camcorder thing, but it was like mini DVDs. And so I, ironically, in the last 5 years, have found these little mini DVDs and watched them, and it kind of brought back all those memories of what I think of the 2005 Alamo Bowl. Of we're there for a week, practicing and stuff. So I see interactions with some of my teammates and friends, and there's a funny experience in there with Ndamukong Suh, who is now playing professionally, and he was I think it was a freshman at the time. So it was just we're kind of reliving the fun moments with the team as we're traveling. And bowl games are always kind of a highlight, I think, of any football experience, just because of the fanfare around it and celebrations, and it's a much bigger experience than going away for just a game. And they give you bowl game gifts, so who doesn't like that?
Anything in particular stand out of the gift package from the Alamo Bowl?
We got, I think it was an Xbox 360 at that time. Microsoft and MasterCard, I think, were the sponsors. And I think every player got an Xbox 360. I think that's the gaming console. I mean, it's been so long. But me at the time, since that had just come out, people were selling that and making a ton of money. And I'm like, all my friends on the team are going to have it. So do I need this? I'm like, no, I'm going to use it to pay off a credit card. So, I mean, I don't know if that's legal, so don't tell NCAA. Hopefully they can't come back and get me in trouble on that. But
it's well past sanctions now, so it's
15 years
all
later.
All clear.
But no, that was nice. Yeah, and you always love you're getting more swag, more Husker gear, and bowl game stuff is usually maybe a step up. But yeah, I have one last Husker gear thing from that time period that I still use, and it is from the 2005 Alamo Bowl. It's a red fleece zip up. The pants have since died. And honestly, if you would see the state of the condition that the jacket is in, you'd probably say it should be retired as well. But I don't know, it's the one thing that I still hold on to, and I wear it a lot. It's one of my go-to things to wear to the gym. I usually just bike over to the gym. I mean, pre-COVID. Now it's I walk into my living room and take out a band and hope to find some motivation. But yeah, so that's one of the things I still kind of cherish and hold on to. My parents have some of my old shorts, though. And I know my dad still rocks them out, especially in the summertime when he's either reffing soccer or softball or out mowing the lawn. So they still live to this day.
Well, Patrick and Nate, the other co-hosts of the podcast, aren't here to make fun of me for my Michigan bashing. So this reminds me of a memory I had a few years ago. There was some Michigan fan who was obviously a 2005 opponent. He had a 2007 Michigan football student section T-shirt, which has the schedule on the back. And he wore it publicly, even to the gym. And it's of course I'm going to walk over to you and make fun of you for the Appalachian State loss to start the season.
Oh.
Come on. You're a Michigan fan. I'm a State fan. I'm going to have to do that. It's I would spontaneously combust as a Michigan State fan if I didn't give a Michigan fan opening the door for that the opportunity to razz them for it. So,
Oh, trust me, I get it. I dated someone here in Chicago for a number of years who went to Michigan State, and also being in Chicago and being so much closer to where Michigan and Michigan State are, I've realized the rivalry is big, and so I totally understand why your need to go kind of tease him for his Appalachian State loss. But
well,
honestly, was it 2015 when we played Michigan State at home? And I know you hate the call that happened, but that we won at the end of the game. Oh, you're gonna pull the picture into this? Nice.
yeah, that was. It probably doesn't come across on the
Yeah, it
camera. We're
does.
at. Yeah. So that was my actually fun background on this that I'll share with you. I don't know if the podcast listeners have heard it before, so I apologize. But Nebraska has a really weird um, spot, I guess, in my own personal college sports fandom. They are the first bowl game and really first road game that I ever went to for Michigan State football, and they're the first Big Ten road game I ever did for Michigan State.
See,
So when I went to the 2003 Alamo Bowl, yeah, that was my first time going to a Michigan State game or any college football game not in Spartan Stadium. And then I turn around and my husband and I met in 2013 when MSU played at Nebraska and had their first of only 2 victories ever. And I was weirdly at an LSU game with a friend of mine here in DC at the time. At LSU, obviously, the friend was also from DC at the time, has since moved. But I was like, this is really fun seeing another stadium. Hey, we play at Nebraska in like a month and a half. Let's go. So I ended up right after the game. I got our flights and game tickets and whatnot, and I went to the game at Nebraska. So it's a fun coincidence since then for me. But yeah, so we were at the game in 2015 with one of my 2 brothers, the one who actually graduated from Michigan State. So yeah, but yeah, well, I mean,
that game is a cool experience for me. I mean, it was 2014 is February of 2014 is when I was kind of thrown into the world of diversity and inclusion in sports. And in that kind of year time period or year and a half until the game that we're talking about, Michigan State versus Nebraska in 2015 at Nebraska, I'd kind of really built a career in diversity and inclusion in sports. And I'd been doing some work with Husker Athletics, and they actually invited me back for that game. And they're like, we'll give you sideline passes. You can bring, your parents and a guest and, blah, blah, blah. You can have lunch and all this sort of stuff. And it was a really cool experience to go back and be championed as not just a Nebraska football player, but on a whole different level of being someone who is championing diversity and inclusion in sports and as an educator of Husker Athletics on diversity and inclusion in sports. So that was really cool to see that. But I remember, like, I took my partner at the time, who I had already mentioned, went to Michigan State. And so whenever, someone says Michigan State, I'm used to saying the Go Green and all that because of him. But I took him to this game. We drove back to Nebraska, brought my parents, and I told my ex, I said, this may be the worst game I could ever take you to, because Nebraska's had a really bad season so far, and the atmosphere might not be what it normally is like for Nebraska football. And I don't want that to jade your experience or whatnot. And I'm like, Michigan State weren't they undefeated? I'm just like, they're one of the best teams in the country. They may annihilate us. So fans might leave early. Let's just don't think too heavily on this is your first Nebraska football experience. And I remember as the game went on, second half, I pretty much ditched my partner and my parents in the stands just to stand with the team on the sidelines, and was there until the end of the game. And I completely lost my voice because of the screaming and the excitement. And it ended up being the best game I could have ever taken him to. And he agreed afterwards, even though he was upset Michigan State lost. But I was like, wow, And then I remember what it was. Dennis LeBlanc was talking to me afterwards. He's like, "I think it was good luck that we brought you back for this." I was like, "Maybe, I don't know." I'm like, "If you want, I'll come back to all of them."
I'm gonna blame my family actually because when I went in 2013, well, so all six of us, my three siblings and my parents, all went to the 2003 Alamo Bowl. We lost. I went by myself with my then boyfriend, but no family members in 2013. We won. Let's separate 2014 in East Lansing, completely different scenario. Uh, but then 2015, one of my brothers comes with me and we lose. And then 2018 in Lincoln again, my parents actually flew out up. They have since moved to Florida since then. But so they flew up from Florida and went to the game in a blizzard,
Oh, wow.
and which I still do not hear the end of. And we proceeded to lose. So I blame it's my family's fault. They are no longer allowed to go to a game that Michigan State plays against Nebraska unless it's in East Lansing. That's it. No more going on the road with me to games there.
Sorry.
But yeah, hey, to be fair, I spent like we flew out on Friday from DC for that. I spent all of Friday and all of Saturday tailgating for the night game, telling all the Nebraska fans that I would come across who would be like, "Oh, you guys are gonna kill us. Like, you're really good. We're really bad." I'm like, "You guys are way better than your record at this point. Like, we may very well lose." Like I was there at Rutgers earlier that season where we ended up, we had a lot of injury problems, to be fair, for why we struggled a little bit in some of these ones, particularly against Rutgers. But I mean, like, we won there because they spiked the ball on fourth down, forgetting that it was fourth down instead of third down, turned it over, and we ran the clock out. Like, we had some squeakers where we really had no business losing or winning as little as we did. And you guys were a much better team. And we played like garbage and deserved to lose the game. But he was not forced out. He was not forced out. He was ineligible. Mistakes happen, oh well. Oh well.
It made an exciting game regardless of the call. And as I've always said, and what I've really learned from college athletics was that, like, and in some ways it's kind of taken some of my passion out of being a spectator, is that stuff happens. And if you're a true championship team, you have to overcome any sort of call, or any sort of whatever officiating or injury or whatnot. You have to find a way. And so that's what I kind of realized in my athletic career there, which is kind of weird because now I'll watch a game and I'll be like, something bad will happen and friends may be yelling at the TV and I'm just calm, like sitting there. And I'm like, in some ways I feel like it killed some of my passion, or maybe it's just reshaped that passion to a much more calmer sense because I know stuff happens and we just got to deal with it. And I don't think often like a lot of fans realize that, of like the mentality of an athlete, is no matter what happens, you have to come out the next play and forget the crap that happened before. And you just got to do your best. So I don't think often people who maybe didn't play sports or grow up playing in a team sport get that sense when they're watching it and they see something bad happen and they just want to like yell at the player or wring the ref's neck or something. But I definitely learned that lesson through my college career.
More than fair, though, spoken by the winning team in that situations. But but no, so that to back up a little bit to kind of the next line of questioning that I was going to have earlier. So Nebraska moved from the Big 12, obviously back in your playing days, to the Big 10. And we talked a little bit about when they were in the Big 12. What do you think overall of the move to the Big 10? Was it the right choice for Nebraska? Was it not? I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but I mean just from the perspective of somebody who was there back in the Big 12 days and now flip it to the Big 10 move. Obviously, was that a huge surprise to you? Good move, bad move?
I mean, initially there was a little bit of like, oh, a little bit of shock or surprise, but then I kind of thought about it and like, it does make sense to me more because of money and visibility. Because I think in the Big Ten you get more of that, and ultimately, sadly, a lot of times in sports that's a driving factor. is visibility and money. So I thought, okay, I can see why. So that wasn't too big of a shock. It was kind of weird for me though, since growing up in Nebraska and always being like, and then playing in the Big 12, it was weird no longer saying Big 12 and then having to get on board with Big 10. And then all of a sudden we're playing teams like on the East Coast. I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. But I've since gotten used to it. I still, like, if we're playing Rutgers or Maryland, I'm like, this is odd. It just doesn't seem natural to me because it wasn't my experience.
I mean, everybody in the Big Ten feels weird playing Rutgers and Maryland. No offense to Rutgers and Maryland, but it's just there's no cultural fit. It's like they're
Yeah.
the I like to refer to them as the in-laws that you get along with fine at family gatherings, but like you have nothing in common with. And so you all just kind of show up to the big family reunion and kind of give a head nod, how are you doing? Yeah, you liking work? Well, okay, cheers. Have a good rest of your time here. Like that's what it feels like with Maryland and Rutgers. I'm sorry to none of them will be listening to this, I'm sure. So I don't feel all that bad bashing them a little bit. But yeah, I mean, have you gone to many road games in the Big Ten? Do you try to go to, say, Northwestern, obviously,
I
when
try to get
Nebraska plays
to
there?
yeah, I try to get to the Northwestern games. Not only just to see Nebraska, but I work closely with Northwestern's athletics department as well. So I am there a couple times a year anyway. So I like to kind of kill two birds with one stone and see both Nebraska and Northwestern because they both share like a special place in my heart for completely different reasons. Like Nebraska, clearly, that's where I played football. That's where I had all these experiences. But Northwestern, well, I guess Northwestern and Nebraska, along with University of Oregon, were all three our founding partners in the LGBT Sports Safe Inclusion Program. So those three powerhouse institutions that made a commitment to inclusion in sport early on, and they're huge, instrumental, and influential institutions. So, but then Northwestern, like the work I've continued to do with them through my organization and stuff, still keeps a special place in my heart. And every year I was kind of saddened due to COVID. We usually have a student athlete and coaches and administrators and staff kickball game sponsored by not only Northwestern athletics department and some student athlete run organizations, but also my organization as well. And we go up there and have like an evening of kickball, and I always play. I usually play on the student athletes team, which is fun. And then we talk about inclusion. We have food. It's a great thing, but because of the pandemic, all that stuff is shifted. But no, I try and go to Nebraska Northwestern games. I haven't made many road games since my playing time. Honestly, after my career ending due to a spinal fusion, and then really not having an opportunity due to a lot of things, including my sexuality, while I played there, it was really hard for me for a number of years to even watch sports, not just football, anything, or even read about them. I spent a good 5 years where I was like, I can't even look. I couldn't. I moved out of like after my spinal fusion, I moved out of my housing with the volleyball players because I couldn't be around sports anymore. It was so hard for me knowing that the doctors were saying you're never going to play sports again, and having to be around it so much. So it took a number of years. It took until probably I was first year of grad school, so probably about 5 years after my playing time, that I was like, oh, I can start watching sports again. And ironically, it was because of dating someone who was from Michigan and his love of Michigan sports. So he kind of eased me into it, I think. And then from there, I would go to Kirkwoods in Chicago as the Nebraska bar. And I since went and met Sean Hill was there with his wife one time, and Ben Eisenhart, who were both friends and teammates of mine at the time. And we watched a game there at one point. So I still try and watch. I would say my sports life has changed so much from focusing on who's playing and what stats are to how inclusive is the athletics department? What are they doing to show up for their student athletes in all walks of life and identities? It's shifted more, so I don't watch as many games, but I am still heavily involved in sports, just in a different way now.
So did he drag you to any games at Spartan Stadiums or the Breslin Center by
No,
chance?
he couldn't
No?
get me there. I let him go
Failure.
once. Well, maybe that's why he's my ex. No, just kidding. I mean, we still get along very well. We're very close friends, so just wasn't meant to be.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Although definitely a failure to not drag you to campus. I've made sure that my husband has been to football, basketball, and even a hockey game actually there.
Oh, nice.
But it's, well, we'll let that lie on his Spartan fandom being questionable. So what would you say are some of the differences now that you might see between being a football player in the 03-05 era to today in 2019, 2020, disregarding obviously COVID-19 currently? Are there much in the way of differences? Is it pretty much the same?
I mean, I think obligation-wise, it's very similar. I mean, I remember my time as an athlete and all the just like meetings we had to go through compliance-wise, and on sexual harassment and all these other areas. I think that's pretty much the same. However, it's shifted more into other areas of inclusion and things to focus on. I think, as always, rules and regulations change and evolve and morph. So there's still a lot of that. So I think like obligation-wise in that sense is very similar, but the topics have changed for the better, I think. Because we're talking about a much wider array of topics and issues and challenges that people may face in their career. But then I think obligation-wise, when it comes to playing, working out, is very similar. It's just health and nutrition-wise, I think things have changed. Workout-wise, it's become more, I think, even more functional workouts versus just constant strength and throwing up the heavy weights, and plates in the weight room, to rolling tires and ropes and different types of things. Granted, we still did some of those types of things back when I played, but I think health and nutrition wise, it's been changed. But that's just because science has grown and evolved, and we've learned more about that. So I think all the changes are the same, are necessary, and they're good changes. But the amount of time, I mean, being an athlete in college is more than a full-time job, which gets me into a whole nother topics of paying athletes and other sorts of stuff. Because like, if I think of even myself, like my career ended with a spinal fusion. I to this day have massive back problems and have since developed a neuromuscular disorder, which most people don't know when they look at me, is that I'm in chronic pain. And so some of that can definitely be related to killing my body in college athletics. So, there's arguments both ways on both sides, and of should athletes be paid and not. But I just think the more people hear different stories and about anything, whether it's paying an athlete or someone's sexuality or gender identity or their race, religion, whatnot, the more they open up their hearts and minds to those differences, create empathy, and kind of allow themselves to humanize others in a way that otherwise they wouldn't. So it's always good to, I'm a big proponent in sharing your story. So I thank you for allowing me to share some of my story on this podcast, because hopefully it allows others to, kind of have the courage to do the same. I think a lot of people feel they don't have a story, or their story isn't as special or meaningful, but I guarantee everyone's story will have an impact on someone. And if you're changing one person's heart and mind, or inspiring someone in some way, it's totally worth it to share it. And you'll realize, I think, through that we have way more commonalities than differences, which is ultimately what we need right now in this world more than ever, because we're so divided.
Very well said. And on that note as well, what are some of the things that you think have been vastly improved since your time in terms of LGBTQ inclusion in athletic departments, and what are some of the things generically, and if you could talk about specifically at Nebraska, and what are some of the things generically across the board schools should be doing to try and improve the experience for LGBTQ athletes, or even just try to encourage people to feel welcome in being an athlete as an LGBTQ person?
Okay, I will try my best to answer all those in this, but if I forget one of those questions, please reiterate it. But I think, like, one, the times have changed so much. Back in 2003, when I first started my career at Nebraska, we didn't talk about LGBTQ athletes or acknowledge their existence in sport. So that alone is so much different now, like visibility wise, and I think largely due to things like media and just changes in society. Young athletes are more accepting of their identities, sexual orientation, and gender identity, and they're sharing those with the world. So we're having to have those conversations. Back in 2003 at Nebraska, the athletics department was very reactionary because they had never had an openly gay athlete, and they didn't know how to respond. Did they respond in the best way? Not always, no. But it's understandable why they didn't, because there was nothing set in place. You know, there was nothing proactive. There was no programming, no education on the topic. So the biggest stride that I've seen nationwide is not only just the visibility is drastically increased. And because of that visibility, we've been forced to have these conversations because we're realizing that more and more, like getting into science of athletic performance and stuff, we're realizing that someone's, mental state and psychology and all this has a big play in how they're going to perform. And when you're talking high level sports, that tiny fraction of play of, whether they're going to be a split second faster or jump an inch higher is going to make a huge difference. So I think now they're realizing we need to have these conversations. And so one of the biggest strides I've seen is that a lot of athletics departments now are being proactive, and they are actively searching for ways to be more inclusive, not only with LGBTQ individuals, but all walks of life. I mean, race, religion, ability, you name it, we're starting to have these conversations. And so if we're talking specifically about Nebraska, like I said, when I was there, it was reactionary. But then once I kind of got thrown into this world of D&I in sports in 2014, they started to reach out, and we started to have conversations that I never in my wildest dreams would have thought Nebraska would get to at that time, just because of my experience and just knowing Nebraska is a very conservative state and we're in the middle of America. But it's been so beautiful seeing where Nebraska was and where they are now, to, being a part of their first ever diversity and inclusion symposium that they had a number of years ago, and they've been doing that now annually since then. That was amazing, being like one of the keynotes at that, where I spoke to all the student athletes and all the coaches, administrators, and staff on two separate events. Like it's just incredible. And knowing that they are now championing diversity and inclusion on campus, and they're making it a priority. It's not just that they're proactive, they're like prioritizing it. And now with DeJuan Baker in there as, head of the diversity and stuff for the athletics department, he's doing a number of wonderful things. And I love that he's there and getting to work with him and, Dennis LeBlanc and some others there. It's just been amazing. They've had LGBTQ inclusion programming for the coaches, administrators, and staff on, how to learn the necessary tools and resources to be supportive of everyone, no matter, regardless of their identity. And that's been a big thing. So across the board, Nebraska's changed for the better, and so many athletics departments have. There's still a lot of work to be done around the country. I think moving forward, more athletics departments need to reach out and figure out a way to have some sort of social competency around inclusion, and especially around LGBTQ inclusion and race and ability and gender, like all those areas. We need to start covering that more. And if anyone's listening to this podcast that is a coach, administrator, or staff member at an institution, that is interested in, having conversations or getting the ball rolling, don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can reach me at eric@lgbtsportsafe.com or Eric Lucian on all the different social media apps. Send me a message, because I know a lot of times some athletics departments hesitate to reach out because they have that fear of, well, we haven't done anything and we're just we don't know what to do. So they don't act because they have that fear that they're behind. Everyone starts from somewhere, and the important thing is that you're trying. And, one of my favorite quotes is, have patience with those who are trying. And if you're trying, I'm going to walk hand in hand with you, and we're going to learn together. I'm sure you're going to learn things from me about diversity and inclusion in sports, and I'm going to learn things about you and your experience and how to be a better person and better role model in my work and everyday life. So I think there's a lot of things that athletics departments can do. Big thing is education, also policy enactment, making sure that they have protections written in place in their non-discrimination policy explicitly for sexual orientation and gender identity, which Nebraska has, Northwestern, and a number of institutions all over the country now do that. And that is actually one of the qualifiers that we have. Like, the baseline qualifier for joining LGBT Sports Safe is that you have a non-discrimination policy that includes sexual orientation and gender identity. But if you don't, that doesn't mean we're not going to work with you. It just means we're going to work with you to get that policy enacted and then get you into a membership. And then we're going to help you focus on inclusive programming, public awareness initiatives, and other sorts of inclusive policies.
Certainly a good improvement to hear about, especially for somebody like myself. But yeah, I mean, I think unless you have any closing thoughts, I think that's probably a pretty great conversation for the pod this week. So certainly thank you for coming on. If you ever feel like joining to talk about basketball later on, I mean, Coach Hoiberg certainly has some excitement going for the basketball program. So, once in a while we obviously talk about football, even though it's a Nebraska ball podcast. So any time in the future, always welcome. So thanks again for joining us for this week.
That was my pleasure. Thanks for having me, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to share my voice and experience with the world.
And for all of our listeners, as always, thank you. We hope that you follow the podcast and subscribe to Corn Nation Radio. You get not only a Bangerangs and Daggers, you get John's Post-Life Crisis, Five Heart Podcast, our new short podcast reaction episodes that we started doing. Certainly rate or review the podcast. We appreciate the feedback. And as always, definitely comment in the feed on cornnation.com. Thank you, and have a great week, everyone.